What's up, gangsters? It is a fine spring day out here at Rube Goldberg Enterprises. A bit blustery, but hey, that's just how it is where I live. And I'm taking a little bit of a break from projects to work on a video project that I've been wanting to do for a while. And that is a test, evaluation, whatever you want to call it, of chrome paints. And I want to use chrome in air quotes for reasons that will become obvious later. Now, this is something that I've done before, but it was embedded in the build video series that I did on my F86 Sabre called the Bare Metal Adventure. And I wanted to kind of update it, and I also wanted to kind of break it out as its own thing to make it a little bit easier to view, but also because the subject of chrome, wow, it's one of those things. There's stuff in model making that generates a lot of insanity. The correct colors for German armor, panel lines in aircraft, but more on the automotive side, occasionally with aircraft guys who want to do a bare aluminum finish, though, is the subject of chrome. And it just almost, it blows my mind how much craziness this subject generates. And it comes on two fronts. The first bit of insanity, in my opinion, is that there seems to be a common culture in auto modeling of automatically deleting the chrome from your kit parts. It's just, there are guys who just act like it is a must-do, always and forever step that's just automatic. Everybody does it. It's, this is what you have to do. And I just completely disagree with that. The rationale there ranges from, well, kit chrome looks toy-like, to, yeah, but, sprue gate remnants and mold seams and stuff like that. And some of that is valid. And in some cases, you don't have a lot of good choices but to strip your chrome and repaint it. But to just automatically do it, I just think is the height of silliness. The second place where this chrome insanity comes up is in the desire for a chrome paint. And you can see it. When I posted a photo on SMCG of what I was going to test here, I immediately started having all these comments about, well, what about this chrome paint? It's the best. Are you going to test it? This is the one I use, and it's been great. It's done great for me. And what about this one over here that you can buff? And it's just, you can tell that the search for chrome is deeply embedded in model making culture because of the instantaneous number of responses. And it's kind of weird because on the one hand, everybody is saying, hey, have you found a really good chrome paint? But then on the other hand, it's like we're conditioned to believe that it is actually possible to paint chrome. And that's the real insanity, because I'm going to argue in this video that you can't. That there is no really good chrome paint. And that if that's what you're trying to do, you're barking up the wrong tree, not going to happen for you. If you can accept that, and that's okay for the results that you're trying to generate, then hey, cool. But if you're running around telling everybody that you should just strip your chrome because you can recreate it with something out of a bottle, yeah, you double crazy, son. Anyway, that's my opinion, and I hope to support it in the following evaluation. So, let's get to work, and let's take a look at what I'm actually going to test. Okay, first things first. I've got my test subjects all laid out here, ready to go. But before we do that, I want to talk a little bit about chrome itself. What is chrome? How does it happen in real life? How does it happen on model kit parts like this one? And why you might want to use any one of these imposters to, yes, I did say imposters, to try and replicate this finish. All right. So first things first, normal chrome that goes on like a bumper or an airbrush or your kitchen faucet, whatever the case may be, that is done by, at least in most cases, modern chrome plating is a process called triple nickel chrome. And what happens is it's triple because it has 3 layers, and typically the first layer is a highly conductive layer of copper, and that helps create, it's kind of like a primer, if you will, for the chrome plate that's going to follow. The next thing that gets laid down is a layer of nickel. Now, nickel is good because it's pretty shiny and pretty durable, and so it makes a good protective coating, but it's not quite pretty enough or durable enough to be used as the top coat. And so what then gets laid on is a layer of chromium. And so you get what's called triple nickel chrome or bright chrome. And what's on this airbrush right here, like on the paint cup, is a perfect example of that. That is your basic triple nickel chrome, and it can go on top of brass, as the case is here. It can go on top of steel, lots of different metals, but it is an electroplating process. And as you can see, it produces a very bright and shiny finish with deep reflections. Now, if you notice, there's a slightly different finish on these parts of the needle chuck on this airbrush. If you look, there's the bright nickel chrome. It's got a kind of a cooler tone, and then this chrome has a kind of a yellowish tint to it. That's because what's on here is made by a process called electroless nickel. I'm not going to bore you with all the details of how it happens, but it's a nickel plate that's cheaper to do than regular bright nickel. And the reason that this gets used is because it's durable enough for an application like this, and more importantly, this is an application where the parts don't have to be quite as pretty. That slightly yellowish tint doesn't really bother anybody because these are just mechanical parts and you don't even see them most of the time. So it's a really good industrial coating for parts that are purely functional and not really decorative. And the point that I'm making there is that not all chrome is equal in real life situations, and that, you know, this is one way where you can add some realism to your model by slightly changing the tone of some of these paints, should you choose to use them, to sort of indicate different industrial processes that have been made to create that finish. So that's what real chrome is. Now, what is model kit chrome? Because it is in most cases very different. There are a few examples, and I think Trumpeter may have done some of this with some of their car models where they actually did electroplate nickel chrome. But the vast majority of model kit chrome is actually not chrome at all. It's aluminum. And I know you're like, what? How the heck can that happen? These two things look almost identical, right? The tone is very similar. The reflectivity is very similar. How can this be aluminum and this is triple nickel? So what happens is this is done in a process called vacuum metallization. And what they do, and there's a really cool video that shows the Tamiya factory in the Philippines where you can see their vacuum metallization chambers. And what they are is just basically giant vacuum chambers that they stick all the parts into. And then they run a hair-sized filament of pure aluminum wire into the chamber, and they run it through a spark that basically boils it instantaneously. And so what you have is a vacuum chamber that's full of aluminum vapor. And that happens at a relatively low temperature because it's a vacuum chamber. And so you've got all this aluminum vapor floating around inside of this vacuum chamber, and as soon as it lands on the relatively cool plastic parts, it instantly condenses and forms this layer of ultra shiny chrome-like material. But it is in fact just aluminum. Now, one thing to know is that sometimes it's done directly on the part, and you get a kind of a satin finish like that. But that also is maybe just because the backside of this part wasn't polished quite as smooth. Because this does have to be super smooth. And so part of what they do, and especially on older kits, like some of the old Revell stuff, they put a layer of clear gloss lacquer on these parts to smooth the surface, because especially in the old days, that was cheaper and easier than polishing the tool enough to give you the kind of finish that you needed for that true mirror-like surface. Anyway, that layer of lacquer that may be underneath your chrome is something that you have to account for when you decide to strip it, because you need something that takes it off as well. Anyway, I don't want to get into all about how to strip chrome, because that's not what this is about. This is about the chrome itself and how you might try and replicate it if you decide that you want to do that. Now, why might you want to do that? Why might you decide to strip this beautiful finish off of this part and try and replicate it with some wannabe chrome paint? Well, some people say, well, it's because this part is toy-like. Well, I don't agree. I don't think this part looks toy-like at all. I think this part is beautifully molded. It looks very much like the real thing, and that certainly would not be a reason for me to want to strip the chrome off of this. What I think happens a lot of times is people decide that parts look toy-like because the parts themselves are just poorly molded. Or maybe that clear lacquer that's underneath is so thick that it starts to mute the detail. And then maybe it does look toy-like. But that's not a problem with the chrome plating itself. That's just a problem with the part. Now, the next reason, which is kind of valid, are things like this, where you've had to remove the sprue gate and you've got the remnant that shows through where the plastic is clipped off and it's laid bare underneath. Now, if those little bare spots were right here on top where they were highly visible, then that might be a valid argument. But number one, these are underneath where they're hardly ever going to show. And number two is you have a couple of things that you can use to make very small spot repairs on this that are going to be barely noticeable. In fact, Dr. Cranky was talking on some of his videos recently about how he's completely quit stripping chrome because A, he recognizes that the kit chrome is really pretty good, and B, it's just so much faster and more effective to just deal with these little spots by using something like Model Master's Chrome Silver Enamel on a brush, or a Molotov, however you say it, chrome pin. And I think, yep, I've got one right here. So here we go. You got this liquid chrome pin, and you can take that thing and very quickly and very effectively just come along here and apply a small repair. All right, obviously it's not perfect, okay? If the camera will focus, we can see. But it's really not bad. It's certainly less noticeable than it was when it was bare. And here's my argument against stripping the entire part just to take care of that. That little bit of almost chrome is much better for the overall aesthetics of your model and the realism than an entire part covered with nothing, something that's nothing like real chrome, which is what the paint's going to be. So that's my argument against doing it because of things like sprue gate remnants. Now, if you have a parting line that runs across here, you don't have a lot of choice. You have to deal with it, and maybe that means stripping it. Now to the third reason why some people argue that you should automatically strip this off, and this is the one that to me smacks of the most insanity. And that is, people talk about the scale effect. Well, because the chrome isn't to scale. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the silliness that people call scale gloss. And that's closely related to its other dumb cousin, scale color effect. Look, The color is the color, the chrome is the chrome, no matter what size it is, okay? You can't look at this part and go, well, that's not properly represented in scale, and then look at this part right here, the barrel of my airbrush, that's exactly the same size, and say, oh, okay, well, because this is 1:1, this is the real size, but yet it's the same size as the kit part. And there's really not any difference, okay? Yes, the reflections in this mirror surface are not to scale. I understand that. But again, that's not a problem with the chrome itself. That's just a problem of photography. If you're really concerned about that, then you can certainly arrange things in your photography setup to deal with it. But the idea that somehow this reflects at a different scale than this is just absurd. And that's by far, as far as I'm concerned, that's the silliest reason to automatically strip your chrome off your kit parts, especially when it's as nice as this Tamiya part is. But obviously, there are situations where you don't have any choice. You just have to do what you have to do. And so you are forced to use one of these so-called chrome paints. And that is the entire subject and purpose of this test. So let's get to it. All right, so let's take a look at what's going to get tested here. Now, my criteria for this was, first of all, that the product had to include chrome in the name. I mean, that just seems kind of obvious to me. If it doesn't include chrome in the name, it's probably not going to even come close. People have mentioned to me things like Mr. Color silver plate. I've tried it, not impressed. And various other things that purport to impersonate chrome, but none of the evidence I've seen makes me think that it's worth spending my time on testing them, because I just don't think they're even going to come close. The second requirement for my test was that it be relatively easy to obtain. And how do I know it's relatively easy to obtain? I have it right here. And that means that in the United States, I can find some place to order it from that doesn't take 13 weeks and $50 worth of shipping and the ability to speak Chinese. So that ruled out stuff like Gaia Notes paint, which I know a lot of people like and seems pretty cool, and they have a chrome finish. I looked at the videos. Doesn't seem to me like it's any different from any of this other stuff, so not worried about it. If your favorite chrome material is not in here, yeah, sorry, not sorry. I've got 7 things here that I'm going to test. I only have a limited amount of energy for this, so yeah, I can't test every single thing. But what I am going to test is a conglomeration of products that include acrylics, lacquers, inks, powders. I guess that covers all of it. So let's break it down. Let's start with the first and most obvious thing, and that is All-Clad's famous ALC 107 chrome. This is kind of like what All-Clad, I think, has just almost practically made their name on. I mean, yeah, they have other metallic finishes as well, but when you hear people talk about painting a chrome finish, you more often than not will see guys say, oh yeah, just use All-Clad. Again, like it's some sort of holy grail with magical properties, and that you just automatically are going to get a chrome finish by opening this tiny little bottle. And it is a lacquer, but one thing to note is that it is not a regular lacquer, and a lot of people don't realize this. This is one of what All-Clad calls their high shine finishes, and it includes the chrome, the stainless steel, the airframe aluminum, and the polished aluminum. And if you read the fine print, you will see something on the label about containing alcohol. This stuff is different from a regular old lacquer, like you will find in this bottle right here from MRP. This is a straight up lacquer. It doesn't behave any different from any other lacquer that I know of. The difference with this one is, as you'll see, it is extremely fragile when it's dry. And I'm going to demonstrate that. Oh, in case you haven't already figured it out, I've already used all of these. I already kind of know how this is going to turn out. But what I want to do is kind of present it all in a single sort of coherent package for you guys who maybe have not used all of these or who are trying to figure out which one to use. Anyway, back to the business. So these two are the lacquers, all right? So we'll put them in their little group, all right? Now let's talk about enamel, all right? This is the one and only thing that I'm certain of here that is an enamel. How do I know that it's an enamel? Well, for one thing, it says right there, high quality enamel. It also smells like enamel, kind of like diesel. So that is an enamel. We know it for a fact. All right, now we've got some acrylics. All right, now acrylics are weird because, you know, they are kind of like pizza. They all sort of look the same, but they have different recipes. So I have this Vallejo metal color chrome, which I can already tell you is going to be a total fail. This looks nothing like real chrome, but I want to demonstrate that, and it does say chrome on it. But this is what I call a normal acrylic. It's probably water-based. I don't know. It behaves like a normal acrylic. And although this stuff does spray really well, it's really thin in the bottle. You can spray it straight out of the bottle, and it's good paint. I think you'll agree with me that it doesn't do much to replicate chrome. Now, also in the acrylic category, I've got this stuff from K-Colors. Now, these materials I've also tested. This is good paint, and it also behaves like acrylic, but I think it's kind of tough to tell based on what the manufacturer says and his documentation what the base for this is, but I believe that this is an alcohol-based acrylic. So that would sort of put it closer to something like Tamiya than to something like this Vallejo. But it's an acrylic. It says right there on the bottle it's an acrylic, and that's what we're going to treat it as. All right, now we get into a couple of things that sort of defy categorization because we don't really know. And this is the aforementioned Molotow liquid chrome ink. Okay, this is the same stuff that's in the pen that I used a few minutes ago to make the little repair on that thing. This is pretty neat stuff. It does a pretty dramatic representation of chrome, but it also has its flaws, which you're going to see as the test progresses. One of the flaws is that this is pretty expensive. Any one of these other things can be had for between $5 and $10 a bottle. I think one of the most expensive ones is this, which is like $9 for that bottle. This refill right here, which is barely any bigger than any of these other things, was about $30. So that's one of its major flaws. Okay, now for something completely different that gets us totally out of the paint category is this. This is neat stuff from Ushi van der Rossen, and this is a metallic powder. It's basically a chrome pigment, if you want to call it that. And you apply it by rubbing it onto a surface using cotton buds. And it produces a pretty dramatic finish, but it also has its weaknesses. Basically, what you're going to see, I hope, and I'll be able to effectively demonstrate, is that each one of these materials has at least some ability to produce a finish that looks a little bit like this. All right, I say a little bit because what you actually are going to end up with is a lot more like that. Okay, this is polished aluminum. And if this is what you want to recreate, then any one of these has a lot of potential to do a pretty good job. But if what you want to recreate is this bright, shiny mirror chrome like this, these are really all garbage. They're not going to do exactly this ever in a million years, no matter how good a painter you are. And if they do come close, and this is kind of the conundrum of these materials, the closer they come to doing this, the more flawed they are in ways that can be really important to us as model makers. And that's what I'm going to show you guys as we carry on. So those are the materials, those are the test subjects. Now, what am I going to test it on? Okay, I've already started preparing my test coupons. All right, and as my buddy Carlos Starton knows, I hate spoons. I hate spoons for a couple of reasons. One is they're just not efficient. You kind of can really, I mean, you can spray on both sides of a spoon, but does anybody do that? I mean, it seems like people always only spray the one side. The knife obviously has two sides, so that's great. But the real reason that I hate testing on spoons or knives, for that matter, is because they don't represent reality. Plastic silverware is produced in very expensive molds that are diamond polished to produce a super smooth finish, which you can obviously see by the reflections on these handles. And at no time is any part of your kit, probably not even the canopy parts in an aircraft kit, ever going to be as smooth as these knives are. Just not going to happen. And so I don't think that that's a representative test for what paint should look like. Yeah, I mean, sure, it may show the potential of how reflective a chrome paint can be, but it just kind of irritates me when people, whip out their perfect plastic spoon with somebody's chrome paint on it and say, oh, look, this is a perfect mirror finish. Yeah, well, that's cool, okay, but now repeat that all over the surface of a model that has had body work done on it, has been sanded and primed, and then base coated for a chrome finish. It is not going to be the same. So what have I done to try and make this more realistic? I took all these spoons and I sanded the blades just very quickly with my Proxxon pin sander and a 1000 grit sanding sponge just to basically take the shine off. Okay, so you can see they're not glossy like the handle anymore. All right, I feel like that's a pretty fair representation of a well-finished model's surface. And then I gave each of them a liberal coating of Mr. Surfacer 1500 lacquer primer. So that gets me the basic prepped surface that I think is relatively equivalent to what you would have with the surface of your model. Now there's a few little flecks of dust and hair and things in here that I haven't dealt with yet, but I am going to take care of that before I go to step 2, and that is to apply the gloss black base. And that's one thing that's common to all of these chrome-like finishes, is that they require a very glossy surface in order to work. That's a big part of where they get their reflectivity from. It's the same theory as using the gloss lacquer underlayer for this vacuum metallization. You've got to have that super glossy surface if you ever hope to even stand a chance of getting to this. All right, and so my chosen gloss black base is Mr. Color GX2 Gloss Black Lacquer. This stuff is amazing. I have yet to find another gloss black paint that is as effective in getting a really nice finish as easily as this GX2 stuff does. And I'll just show you an example. These are some test samples from when I did my bare metal adventure project, and these are all painted with GX2. I mean, look at that. And it's hosed on thick and wet. And in this case, it's directly on the plastic, which you can do, and you'll probably be fine. But again, because I want to be as realistic as possible, and I'm accounting for the fact that you might have had to do a lot of body work, I chose to use a primer on my test samples. And I'll get just as good a finish off of them as I do off of this test part. But that's going to be the basic finish for almost all of these sample materials. There are a couple of exceptions. One of them is the K-Colors. Now, K-Colors has their own acrylic gloss black base, which is this stuff right here. And when I heard about it, I was immediately super skeptical because I have never met an acrylic that would gloss up worth a shit. They're just not built for it. And so I didn't expect this stuff to work well at all. I was truly surprised in my testing because it did produce an excellent gloss black base that dried quickly. And the reason that K-Colors wants you to use this stuff is because it's an alcohol-based material, and so are the chrome paints. And so what happens is the chrome paint opens the surface of the gloss black base as soon as it goes down, and as it all cures back together, that gives you a better bond and a more durable surface. And what I mean by it opens the surface is basically it just starts to melt it a little bit, kind of the way a lacquer does when you spray it on top of another lacquer. So for the K-Colors chromes, I'll be using probably this gloss black base. I say probably because the owner also told me that I could use their 2K clear, which he has also sent me. But I don't know that I'm going to do that because again, I don't know that it's necessary. I've shot the K-Color stuff before with their gloss black base, and it works really good. So I don't know that I'm going to change horses for this test. All Clad would like for you to use their gloss black base. And there are people who say, oh, it's like it's religion. Oh, you must use All Clad gloss black base for chrome. Yeah, that's nonsense. You don't have to. You just need a really glossy black surface. And All Clad's gloss black base enamel is garbage. If you've never heard that the stuff may or may not ever cure, if you haven't seen people online talking about how they did a model using All Clad gloss black base and it's still sticky 2 years later, then you're not reading the internet very well. I mean, it's just that common. So I'm definitely not going to be using their gloss black base enamel. I will be using the GX2. Now, there are people who argue that you need to use an enamel with All Clad because, again, it does that same thing of reopening the surface and creating a better bond. I can tell you from experience that while that sounds good if you say it fast, in the case of All Clad, it doesn't hold true because the stuff is super fragile no matter what you do. You can rub it off with your finger, and I'll show you that, pretty much no matter what you put it on top of. And the shinier that surface is, the easier it rubs off. So I'm not going to, that's why I'm going to go ahead and just use this stuff fully cured, fully dried, whatever you want to call it, for the All Clad chrome. Now, one where I'm still not 100% certain what I want to do is on this Ushi van der Rosten polishing powder, because I have learned that this glossier the base is with this stuff, the less it sticks to it. This has a kind of a waxy consistency to it, and the more you rub it, the shinier it gets. But if it's not firmly bonded to the surface, it will just eventually just rub right off. And it actually works really well on a light matte surface like I've already got with these primed parts. So for the powder, I may just choose to go straight over this surface. I don't know. We'll see. That may just be part of how the whole test unfolds. But anyway, that should give you a pretty good idea of what I'm going to test, what I'm going to spray it on, and how the parts have been prepped and why I did it that way. So I'm going to go off now and hose a bunch of this on these knives. I'm not going to make you guys watch any of the spraying, except maybe one thing we'll talk about later. But hopefully with that, I'll manage to keep this relatively condensed, because I know, hey, these things tend to run long. So I better get to it. So it's late at night and I'm doing a little bit of work here, and I just wanted to show you guys something. Earlier today I shot these knife sample with the GX2, and I did it exactly the way that I did these older test pieces that I showed you, which is basically one mist layer and a couple of really wet layers. I mean, you have to hose this stuff on. If you're not used to painting this way, which a lot of aircraft guys certainly won't be, you really have to force yourself to spray in a way that just seems way too heavy. If you try to sneak up on it doing these light mist coat layers that we're used to as military modelers, you'll just never get this kind of gloss. You have to hose it on thick and fast. And I did that with these, but for whatever reason, even though they looked great when I shot them, when everything dried out, they just didn't look all that brilliant. I mean, you can see that's not terrible. And, you know, for a lot of purposes, that might be okay. Like for an aluminum finish on a military aircraft, that might be okay. But for what I'm trying to show here, which is the really reflective chrome, that's just not good enough. I mean, it's just not. And there's no getting around that. Now, before you say that it's because I primed these and sanded them instead of using fresh spoons, this is a fresh spoon that I did not sand. I shot primer straight on it and then blasted it with GX2 just because I wanted to have some extra samples. So they looked like this, had a few little dust specks in them, and I just got done rubbing them out. And I used these new sanding sponge sticks that I got, that I just tested like yesterday from Infinity. I got these from Matt Bowl at Hobby World USA. And I started with the 1000 grit, went to the 1500, and went to the 2500. And because I was just had a small area to do, wasn't too worried about it, I just dry sanded them. And these things really are pretty good. I'm super impressed. That's what I've got after a quick rub down with those 3 grits. I mean, that's nice. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to hose that down with 2 more layers of GX2 and hopefully get the finish I need. But I just wanted to show you guys that. And these things were nice. The reason I mentioned that I dry sanded, which if I'd had a lot to do, I would not have dry sanded because your paper just gets clogged up too fast. But because this was such a small, quick area, all I did was wipe these off on my pants leg, and look how clean they are. I mean, that's pretty impressive. Not bad. These things are neat. Okay, gangsters, it's the next morning, and I have reshot the samples that have the GX2 on them. And of course, right now, they look pretty amazeballs, but we'll see how that holds up over the next hour or so. I'm already getting a little bit of texture on that one. You can kind of see that. Looks pretty gross close up, looks pretty good far away. It's definitely enough to make it too much texture for a chrome finish. But at any rate, we'll see what happens. The thing that I've experienced with these GX colors, which GX2 and GX100, super clear to be fair, the only ones that I've shot, is that they shrink a ton over that first hour. So you'll shoot them and they'll look really nice and shiny, and then, you know, you'll come back and they might not look quite as good. I also, as I kind of alluded to before, have had better experience shooting it directly on plastic than I have on top of primer. You know, you can always polish this out if you have texture, but the thing that I love about GX2 is the not having to polish. And in fact, probably getting a better result without it because you're not touching it. If you have little goobers in your surface, like I do on some of these samples, little hairs and just little pieces of shit like that, you don't have any choice. You just have to accept that there's a goober and there's no shortcut to fixing it. You just have to wait for the stuff to cure out, at least a few hours, then go in and spot sand and polish that to take care of it. So anyway, we'll see how those turn out. I'm a little bummed that they're not coming up the way that I want them to as quickly as I would expect, but it is just part of the process. I've got about, let's see, 5 layers on these right now, and who knows, I may come back and put another couple of layers on. We'll see. One thing about the GX is that it may look super thick when you're spraying it, but again, because of all that shrinkage, it ends up being okay. Now, I also sprayed last night the K-Colors XW100 Black on these 2 test pieces, and yep, also not going that great. The stuff is pretty thick in the bottle, and you have to spray pretty high pressure. He recommends 2 to 2.5 bar, which, 30 psi. I don't have a problem with that, but it is pretty high. It'll freak a lot of people out. And it came out still pretty thick. I don't know if it's thickened up in the bottle in the 6 months I've had it or what, but you can see that there are parts of it there that are really good. But there's a definite problem there, and what happened is I had an area that just got too thick. Just pulled the trigger a little too hard, and there was a distinct difference in the coverage there, and obviously it did not all level out as it dried. I mean, that's a complete disaster, and gonna have to be fixed before I can use these pieces. But you can definitely see the potential of that stuff to come up to a really nice gloss. This side I didn't screw up, and it's better. But neither of them are as good as the sample that I sprayed when I first tested this stuff. So what I think that I'm gonna do with these, because I've been having conversations with Christian, and he maintains that that their 2K, their new 2K, is even better as a base coat for the chrome. And I've got that right here. I've got the resin and the catalyst, which he very confusingly calls an airbrush lacquer and names it K2. It is a 2K gloss urethane. And he and I go round and round about these naming conventions. I don't know why he insists on calling it lacquer. Lacquer and 2K are not the same thing. And I don't know why he keeps wanting to call it that, but whatever. Anyway, his deal is he's been testing it, and he says that the ideal thing that he's found is to spray the 2K, let it cure for an hour, and then hit it with the chrome. Because at that point the surface is still a little bit open, and it creates what he says is a really strong bond, and it will make the chrome very tough. So I think I'm going to test that out. I'm going to sand and polish. Well, you don't really have to polish it, but I'm going to sand these out, get them flattened to where they don't have the flaws in them, and then I'm going to do exactly as he says with the 2K. So we'll see later how that turns out. Okay, so here we go. As promised, I have sanded down these samples that have the K-Colors XW100 Black acrylic on it. And, this stuff, even though it didn't really spray for me very well this time, and that's frustrating because it did spray so surprisingly beautifully the last time I used it, and it annoys me because I really want a product to be consistent. If it doesn't work for me every time, then that's a huge red flag. So I have mixed feelings about this stuff at the moment, but it did sand out beautifully, which again is not something that I typically expect from an acrylic. And again, I used my new Infinity sponges, and in this case I only ran it down, I hit it with 1,000 and then with the 1,500. And so you can see that is plenty sufficient to go over it with a 2K urethane clear. I'm basically just treating this like I would any other 2K clear situation, where that was going to be the final gloss coat as opposed to being a base coat for something else. So I'll get to that in a second. My other sticks, it's about, I don't know, it's about 2 hours, 3 hours later after I finished spraying these. I did go ahead and hit these again with another pretty wet coat of the GX2. And you can see, again, not bad, but there's still some very distinct orange peel there. And again, that just would not be good enough for a perfect chrome surface. How much more I tinker with it, though, I don't know. I haven't decided yet. Because, you know, if this was the skin of an aircraft, for example, which I was trying to do as bare aluminum, that would probably be okay. So I don't know. We'll see. And I already know from having worked with some of these, all of these materials before, that some of them are more sensitive to that base coat prep than others are. Like the all-clad chrome, for example, is super sensitive to the smoothness of the base coat. So what I may do is tomorrow, after this has had a good 24 hours of curing up time, is polish the ones that I feel like it's worth doing it to. And then the other ones, like for the Vallejo acrylic chrome, it ain't gonna matter. It's not gonna look like chrome no matter what I do. So I probably won't bother with polishing for it. And same thing probably for the Molotow. It has proven to be relatively insensitive to the quality of the base coat, which is a point in its favor. So I may leave its sample just like it is there. Or I may like polish one side and not the other just to show a comparison. So anyway, with that, I'm going to get on with spraying the 2K onto these pieces and then come back in an hour and put the chrome on it as Christian suggests. Okay, here we go. I'm back, and it is about an hour and a half after I sprayed the 2K clear gloss on the test coupons that I'm going to use for the K-Colors Chrome. It would have been only an hour, but I've actually been texting like mad with Christian Bertolini at K-Colors. He's a really cool guy, and I respect his enthusiasm for making a good product a lot. And he listens, and that's important. I've been bugging him about why he calls this a lacquer, there's just some confusion about terminology, and there's a language barrier because he's Italian and stuff like that. But I prevailed on him to just call this stuff 2K Gloss Clear, and there will be a slow one, a medium one, and a fast one. And this K2, which I told him was also confusing, is the fast one, meaning that it's supposed to be K-Colors and it takes 2 hours. I'm like, look, dude, just call it the fast 2K Gloss Clear. Now, if you're not familiar with 2K materials and you don't understand why I'm so emotional about what this stuff gets called, let me explain very quickly. A 2K material has a resin and a hardener, or a catalyst if you want to call it that. And what happens is nothing until you mix the two of them together. In order for this resin to turn into a hard shell of material, it has to be kicked off with this catalyst. And this is no different Then 2K clear from Gravity. MRP makes one now. I use U-POL a lot. That's an automotive 2K clear. It's basically the same stuff that's on that your car is clear coated with, and it is bulletproof. It's pretty forgiving. It sprays and lays really nicely and gives you a really nice wet look gloss that you may not even have feel the need to polish. And so it makes a good base potentially for this chrome stuff that we're trying to do. How is that different from a lacquer, and why should they not be confused? Lacquers, by definition, have a drying mechanism as opposed to a curing mechanism. Basically, with a lacquer, the resin is dissolved or melted or whatever you want to call it inside of the carrier, which is, let's just call it lacquer thinner. There's lots of recipes for lacquer thinner, but let's just call it lacquer thinner. And when the lacquer thinner evaporates and the material dries, it returns to basically its normal state. And that's why you can reactivate a lacquer paint that's already been dried, whereas you can't do that with something like a 2K urethane or an acrylic or an enamel that's been fully cured. So this is why I get all fired up about calling things by their correct names, because it may not really seem like it makes much difference, but I think it's important for people to understand their materials and the basic chemistry. And this is not a lacquer. So anyway, that's enough of that. Now, getting back to putting the chrome on it, okay? Again, Christian's testing tells him that the chrome is most durable when you put it on top of this 2K that is the fast drying version. So that's why he recommends letting it sit for only an hour. All right, but look at that. Look at that gloss that's on there. Not perfect. I mean, if this was, going to be an automotive finish coat, I'd still probably want to polish that out. But I mean, look at that. That is the kind of gloss that we need for this chrome thing. You can see a little spot there where I sanded through it, the black base coat when I was fixing it. But these are what I'm going to put the K-Colors chrome on. And it needs to be laid down in a light, dry layer and left for 12 hours. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do right now. And then we'll come back and look at these tomorrow. Now, here's an interesting thing. I find 2K gloss clears to be some of the most forgiving paints that I've ever used. Never seen them attack anything. But because I had enough in the gun that I didn't want to waste and I figured I could use some extras, I blew that on top of just this Mr. Surfacer 1500. Didn't go very well, as you can see. It's not as many layers. I have, on these pieces, I have 3 layers on the back side and 2 layers on the front side. And 2 layers, probably enough, but you can see that 3rd layer really made a difference. The thing is, you may not be able to get away with that on something like an aircraft wing where you've got, fine detail that you don't want to soften. But I only put, I think, 1 layer on these things, and it just really didn't look that good. But the important thing to notice is what it did to that Mr. Surfacer 1500 underneath. You can see where it kind of lost its opacity, and I don't really know what that's about. You can see it better on this other piece. I mean, I've shot 2K on top of a bunch of stuff, and it never did anything like that. So I don't know. Anyway, it works fine on top of the K-Colors gloss black acrylic that's been sanded down. So anyway, back to the paint booth.